Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 56th level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage Ryan Turford, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 elf ranger, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, you were gone for a bit of a fortnight, but you're back. 2 weeks. How's it going?
I've been out. I've been on a quest here and there. Yeah, the past 2 weeks. Thank you for letting me go for a little bit. The first time around was 4th of July weekend, so of course had to go around shooting fireworks everywhere as the United States does into all the oceans. And then last week I was in New York City for a conference. So I've been lots of traveling.
Nice.
For the past weeks, but I'm back.
I even saw that you met Joe after work in person as well.
Yes. What a nice guy, man. Yeah, I saw Joe in New York City. He is a streamer over at twitch.tv/Joe After Work. He does a lot of older retro games. He does a lot of role-playing games. Right now, I think he is playing Dark Souls Remastered on Switch. So go check him out. Very nice dude. We hung out, had some drinks. It was very good to see him, for sure.
Yeah, it's awesome that you got to meet Joe. Was it your first time meeting him, or have you met him before?
It was my first time meeting him. Yeah.
Nice. So, that's awesome. Yeah, Joe has always been a
thing.
pillar of this community for a long time, so it's awesome to see him up there. He's always super nice too, but I've never actually met him in person either. Maybe one day, Garret. Maybe one day, but
maybe one day.
That's Joe After Work's shout out on the show. Also, I got to give another shout out to Kevin Ainsworth for filling in Garrett's place 2 weeks ago. We didn't have a show last week. I do apologize for that, folks. It's just one of those things where the guest and I couldn't find a time that really worked last minute, combined with just ultimately I kind of felt like I needed a week off anyways, because we were also working off on another review which just went live today with As Dusk Falls, and I was pretty busy with that because I had to basically play through that game, and then we did the review, and then we have a spoiler cast coming pretty soon for 2 that we recorded last week. So
heard it's pretty good.
It's really good.
It's not bad.
I mean, especially if you like like point and click adventure games or
I like Telltale a lot.
Games.
Yeah. I like Life is Strange, so I would be down to try this one out.
There's just no walking around like Life is Strange, though. It's
got it.
The basically choices, and then you have a still frame and you click on things. But for the most part, it's a great experience. But that's not an RPG. So let's break out of this shell.
Not an RPG. Yes.
The dungeon of the pesky mobs, because we got to get to that raid boss and talk about, remasters and remakes. So folks, if you want to support the show, there's a number of awesome ways to do that. Number one, like the video, subscribe to our channel, and then ring that notification bell to be notified whenever we go live with our new videos. If you're watching us right here on youtube.com/carpoolgaming. Of course, if you're listening on audio feeds, don't forget to subscribe on there as well. And don't forget to rate us 5 stars either on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, depending on what platform you decide to listen on. Also, if you want this show a little bit early or any of our myriad of exclusive shows, heading over to Patreon, patreon.com/carpoolgaming. Throw a little tip in the old tip jar and out comes content, including a special little episode that Garret and I are recording tomorrow night with some other fine folks from Carpool Gaming.
Ooh.
That'll go live on Patreon, and it's going to be an exclusive show to Patreon, so you're going to have to check it out there. Also, if you want an RPG Cave shirt, you can head over to our merch store, bit.ly/CPG merch, to go do all of that. Well, without further ado, Garret, I think it's time for us to finally, once again, read from the sacred texts, because and here's the thing. Originally, when we planned this topic, we didn't actually anticipate, it lining up with any particular game that was coming up or anything like that. But I'm going to go ahead and say this right here. To celebrate the release of Live Alive on Friday this week, which is a big remake of a classic game, we're going to look back at some of our favorite remasters and remakes of RPGs across a myriad of platforms. We also polled the audience, and the audience actually gave us a bunch of great responses as well. So huge shout out to everyone who decided to write in this week for helping us do the show. And also, I'm going to just point out there as well, this topic was actually suggested by the community. This is another one of the community topics that I referred to, a couple weeks ago on our survey. So huge thank you to our community for suggesting this topic to us, and saying that, hey, yes, you want us to talk about remakes and remasters of RPGs. Well, Garret,
good stuff.
We didn't ever really plan how many of these we were going to talk about I just brought a list of a bunch of them, and I'm sure you've got a list too. So would you?
I got a list.
Would you like to go first or second?
Well, here's the thing. When I was looking into this, I was surprised about like how few role-playing games that were remade and remastered and how many I've actually played. But I do have a list. I have four, probably technically five, but four games.
Okay.
On my list. And so the first one I just want to shout out because I know we'll be talking about it in the future. Very close, actually. I'm going to be talking about Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. It was remastered, ported over onto the Switch, originally on Nintendo Wii. And let me tell you, Ryan, this one was he's got that special edition, folks. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, they fully enhanced the graphics, making it more Xenoblade Chronicles 2 like art style. Very smooth, it performed very well compared to Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And it just ran beautifully on Switch. And you know, when they actually, well, I was looking back at the Wii version, it was very it looked a late GameCube type of like graphic style. It
That's
had
what a lot
this
of Wii
very
games look like, actually.
Yeah, very clunky. It had that 2D polygon features. Like, oh, that's Shulk's face, but it's like it's a polygon-ish with some pixels on his face. Like it looks pretty rough. And then they were like, hey, we're gonna have Xenoblade Chronicles on 3DS. And I'm like, great, it's gonna look, you know, okay, right? It's like, no, it's gonna look worse than the Wii version. We're gonna make sure that you barely figure out what you're doing in that game. And then, of course, they right their wrong and put it on Switch. I think it was like 2020. And so, yeah, it was like one of my favorite games that year. I love that game to death. That is the definitive way to play that game, much more smoothly. Of course, they added the new standalone DLC, Future Connected, which connects a little bit of parts of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2, as well as it's connected to 3 somehow. I'm not gonna go into spoiler territory here, but all the trilogy of Xenoblade Chronicles, it's pretty massive. It's getting crazy at the end here. So please, if you have not played Xenoblade Chronicles ever, like the franchise ever, this is the first game to play. The definitive edition, and then you can play 2, and then you can play 3, and then X is somewhere in there if you have a Wii U in your basement or garage or whatever.
You say this, but I literally spent about 6 hours today playing my Wii U, Garrett, because I pulled out a copy of my copy of Metroid Prime Trilogy today, and I was having a ball because I was like really in the mood today for whatever reason to play Metroid Prime, the original, and man, that game's still awesome. But
nice, dude.
playing that on Wii U. But yeah, your comments ring totally true about, you know, the original Wii version, because you have to remember the original Wii
looked rough.
Even though it had component cables, the highest resolution it could output is 480p, which was the same resolution the GameCube could. So it's just like it didn't get the HD bump that every other console had at the time, and because they were going for something more realistic than something like Skyward Sword was going for, it just didn't look as good as the Skyward Sword or a Mario Galaxy or anything like that, because it was trying to be more realistic, and games of that era were just, especially like the time that came out in, was just, it just aged very poorly visually. So to your point, Garrett, it's actually, definitely. I'm very glad that there is like a good playable version of that game on modern consoles. And we actually have a listener who also wrote in about that game as well. We'll get to that in a little bit later because they had other things they wanted to talk about in there. But that 3DS version, whew, it's real bad.
I played some of it. I'm like, no, I'm good. I love my 3DS, but this ain't it. We're not playing Xenoblade Chronicles on 3DS. It's kind of crazy. They made it exclusive on the new 3DS.
It was one of two games that was exclusive.
One of two games. It was that. What was the other one?
I don't remember. It was an eShop game, though. I don't remember. It was because Xenoblade Chronicles was the only physical one that was exclusive.
There was that. No, Fire Emblem Warriors was the other one.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. You're right. And then the Super Nintendo Virtual Console games were also
the Super Nintendo Virtual Console.
Because you needed the power of You needed the power of the new Nintendo 3DS in order to play, Super Mario World or something like that.
You need an overclocked mobile chip. Got it. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Exactly.
That's good. Thanks, Nintendo.
Yeah, but I think I've got more to say about Xenoblade Chronicles Remastered as well, but I'm going to save that for next week, because next week's topic, spoiler alert, it's Xenoblade Chronicles. Because, of course, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is out next week, so we got to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles next week. So
for sure,
look out for that on next week's show. So I've got, as in true Ryan Turford fashion, Garrett, I've got 9 games.
You got 20.
I've got 9 games.
You got 9.
I had 5 normal ones and then 4 honorable mentions, including one cheating one as well. So I'll do 2 quickly before I go back to you again. So first off,
okay, no, it sounds great.
I mean, and the first one has already been spoiled for you if you're watching over on YouTube or if you've read the title of this on your podcast service. It's Trials of Mana, from 2020. I have the Switch version. It also came out on PlayStation 4. This originally was a Super Famicom game that was Japan only, and then Square Enix ended up doing a North American re-release of that with an actual English translation in the Collection of Mana that came out on Switch. That was also Japan only for a while, but then it did eventually come to North America around the time that Trials of Mana actually came out. But this was a game I was really worried about the remake of going into it because of because of how much I loved the original on the Super Famicom, because I did play like an older version for it that was fan translated and just had a blast playing, the original release of it. And I was a little bit worried with them going to like a 3D version of that game that they would totally ruin it. But honestly, this game is amazing. It's one of the best action RPGs I've played this generation. I really enjoyed it. Yes, It's got some, iffy English voice acting, to say the least, with some, questionable characters that sound interesting. But you don't have to play with English voice acting. You can play with the Japanese voice acting, and it's totally fine.
There we go.
Yeah. So that's the way I would usually recommend to play this. Plus, you can even play it with the original Super Famicom music if you prefer it over the orchestral versions that they did for the remake. Both soundtracks are great, but I even kind of actually prefer the Super Famicom version as well. But I really like this remake. I think it's exactly what you want out of a good remake, where it pays homage to the original game. In fact, like the mini-map that you have in the top right-hand corner of your screen is literally the map from the Super Famicom version, miniaturized, and you use that to run around the area, which is cool. So there's it pays homages to the original version, while also, fixing some of the annoying parts of the original version of this game. So I think Trials of Mana is a fantastic remake and exactly the kind of game that I want, remade. And again, it was a game I was really worried about at first, but the second I had my hands on it, I knew that it was going to be something special. And then the other one I wanted to talk about, that again we've talked about on the show before, which is why I'm not going to dwell on it too much, and that's Final Fantasy VII Remake. We've talked about it on the show during the Final Fantasy VII episode. I think it's a pretty good remake of the original game. Like, all the parts of that remake that are from the original game are amazing. Like, whether it's the fight versus the Airbuster, or, the Shinra Tower falling, or climbing, to Shinra headquarters to rescue Aerith. Like, all of the key moments in that, or even like stuff like the motorcycle chase, like all that stuff's amazing in the remake. There are some things that I don't love about it. Some of the added stuff that almost feels like fluff or filler in some aspects, but I think it's also a really good remake. For the same reasons I talked about with Trials of Mana, where I think, it pays homage to the original, while also modernizing it in a lot of ways. Plus we have the original version just sitting there on our modern consoles, so we don't really have to worry about, if we don't like this remake, it ruins the original version for us, or it's not available to us when it's, right there on our Switches or Xbox or PlayStation or wherever we play games. So yeah, Final Fantasy Remakes is awesome. I saw, of course, the trailer a few weeks ago for, Rebirth, the second of 3 games in the trilogy. Yep. And it looks great too, because it's already referencing, certain events from, where we're kind of picking up from with this remake. So I'm very excited about that later next year. Cool. But had to mention.
Awesome, man. Yeah, those are great too, remakes. I just want to mention both games. Like, you really I mean, like maybe it'll have some added value if you played the original ones, but you really don't. Like these are really cool standalone by itself great JRPGs, and they're remakes, so they're way different than their original form
Yeah.
back in the day. So I definitely want to get through Trials of Mana. It looks super cool. It looks like a really cool, like, I don't know, like a 3D, more MMO, like, progression-ish RPG type of game. And then Final Fantasy VII Remake, of course. I played like the first 30 minutes of it, and I'm like, I love this so much. Okay, I gotta play the classic before, and then
Yeah.
everything just went down. Like a lot of other games.
Well, and the
So,
thing is, like, Final Fantasy VII Remake is much farther away from its original, so I think it's even more appealing to new players, whereas Trials of Mana actually just feels like the Super Famicom version, but in 3D. So I think it's actually like a very literal interpretation of the original game. But
that's really cool.
Two different ways of approaching it, but I think both equally as successful. But Garrett, I want to hear from you next. What do you got next for me?
All right. I was not about to put this, but I thought this was hilarious. I want to showcase a little show and tell as well.
Okay.
This is my Game Boy SP that I got when I was, I don't know. I was like 10 or 11 years old, and whenever the SP came out, it's already, fully there. I got it engraved, actually.
Ooh.
You can see my home phone number that doesn't work anymore. When we used to, call each other, on a home phone.
I'm just surprised you engraved your phone number on your GBA, Garrett.
It's like, if I ever lost it, they know who to call. And yeah, they have my name and my birth date on it. So it's pretty funny. But anyways, what's in this SP is one of my favorite Pokemon games. It is Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green, the remakes to the original Pokemon Red and Green, of course, Blue, here in North America and Europe. This was actually really kind of crazy at the time as a kid, because I grew up playing Pokemon Yellow. That was my first one. And then I went back and actually played Red and Blue all the way through and did the old versions, and I love Pokemon to death. When this came out, this was I was in 5th grade, so I was like, it was probably like 3 or 4 years later I played this one, and they did so much to remake and modernize the game at the time. This is like the definitive way to play the original game, is Fire Red and Leaf Green. It takes you through the same stuff, right? Like the first, 8 badges, the Elite Four, and then what it does is like it actually captures the first 3 generations of Pokemon. So you could trade in any Pokemon up to, Groudon, Kyogre, Rayquaza, or whatever in the 3rd gen into this. 3rd gen Pokemon can pop up later. There's like an end part. So after you beat the Elite Four, in regular Red and Blue, you just capture Mewtwo and you're good. But in Fire and Leaf Green, there's a lot more to it. You go to, I forgot exactly what the islands were called, but you go to this separate part. It's a whole, I think this was the first part Pokemon had a full-on DLC. It's like, this is the second part. This is the extended edition of Fire Red and Leaf Green. You get these like special moves for your starter Pokemon. Overall, I had a fantastic time playing Fire and Leaf Green. I remember having the guide for it, and in the hallways, going to the bathroom, I would open it up and look into it and just scavenge around and see what I can find. But man, I love these Pokemon versions. So yeah, I highly recommend, if you want to play the original Pokemon games, you can. But Fire and Leaf Green is a really good way to play them as well.
Nice.
So that's where I'm going to leave it.
Well, first off, Garrett, thank you for making me feel super old, by the way, because you were talking about
Yes.
how young you are when you got your SP, and
I
was in college and working at the time when you were, 6. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I'm sure it's not
fine.
weird at all. I mean, my knees aren't creaking or anything like that, just hearing it or anything like that. But, I'm actually glad that you brought a Pokemon game in here, first of all, because everyone knows you're definitely the more of the Pokemon fan than I am. And Pokemon has been a series that's been like filled with remakes, and all of the remakes have all been, I think, for the most part, really good. Like even Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which I know people weren't super amazed with, I still think that those are, solid games as well. So
Yeah.
I'm glad, I'm glad we cover at least Pokemon on here, because I think that the Pokemon company's always been doing a good job with remakes for a long time.
Yeah.
Even if they don't always remake the Pokemon game that you want, it doesn't matter. They're always giving you some good experiences there. So I'm glad that you gave us your story, and I'm glad I got to see your old SP, in the frame, Garret, which is exciting.
Yeah, I can't believe I still have it, the original. I need to charge it up, and I have some GBA games. I have Yoshi Story, I got Donkey Kong Country, I got some Pokemon games, so
nice.
Yeah, I gotta just boot it up and play some of it.
Yeah.
That's my only original hardware, like old hardware I have anymore is the SP.
Oh, okay.
So
nice. Yeah, whereas my SP, because I had also bought the SP when it came out, I bought the black one, and I really also enjoyed the SP as well. Like, it was my introduction to the Game Boy Advance, because I didn't buy the original version of it. And then I had bought the Game Boy player for my GameCube, and I was like, oh, I don't need my Game Boy Advance SP anymore. I'm just gonna go sell it, and that was a terrible idea.
Oh no!
And then I ended up selling my GameCube with my Game Boy player in order to buy my Wii. So it's just like it was just I was just full of bad ideas, but. At the same time, I've also kept, consoles way longer too, because I still have my original Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo that I had from a kid, because,
oh,
goodness.
those.
And they still work. I still play on them. So there you go.
Nice.
Whereas nowadays, mostly I'm playing, GBA games on my Analog Pocket, which is a great device. I love that thing.
Nice.
Cool. Well, next up, I'm going to talk about a game that I actually talked about on a video last week, because the Sega Genesis Mini 2 is coming out pretty soon, Garret. I'm actually super excited for it.
I'm sure.
Even though you can't actually order it to Canada, you have to order it to the United States, and then I guess I'm going to have to pick it up from someone's house there. But one of the games included in the collection, which is very, very expensive, is actually a fantastic remake of 3 games in one. So the game in question, Shining Force CD. I've talked about this all the way back on the Shining Force episode. This, believe it or not, most people don't know this is a remake. This is actually a remake of the 3 Game Gear Shining Force games, because they did 3 of them. The stories all tied together, and they almost felt like one complete game. So what they did with to bring Shining Force to the Sega CD is Camelot basically took all 3 of those Game Gear games and turned them into one really big epic game with some cool cutscenes and just fantastic CD audio. Like, I love Shining Force CD. I think it's one of the best tactical RPGs I've ever played. Which, of course, if you aren't familiar with the Shining Force series, folks at home, it's kind of like Sega's answer to Fire Emblem in a lot of ways. So it plays very similar to Fire Emblem, although it is, I think it's a little more arcadey than Fire Emblem, because you don't have to worry about permadeath in this game. Although you do have consequences for death, like you do have to pay, to resurrect your characters and whatnot. But I love the Shining.
Quick too.
Yeah.
It's pretty fast. Yeah.
I love the Shining Force games, though, and Shining Force CD, the best Shining Force game probably, and it's a remake of all things too. So I really love this game. It really is one of the hallmark games for the Sega CD. And again, this physical copy goes for anywhere between $500 and $750 if you want a complete copy. So that's why I've got it in a nice fancy protector so I don't damage it, because Sega CD cases are very easy to break. But I love Shining Force CD. It's amazing. And I hope that with the Sega Genesis Mini 2 coming out later this year, hopefully this means more people get to play it, because I think it's an amazing remake.
So I have a question. The Sega Genesis Mini 2, is this just another compilation of Sega Genesis games that includes Sega CD?
Yeah.
Games?
So it's a mini console, just like the Sega Genesis Mini 1 was. But it's in the form of the Model 2, and it comes with a 6-button controller this time. Thank God. But it includes 57 more games. There are some unreleased games in there. There's also a plethora of very expensive Sega CD games in there. There's actually rumors that we might get Snatcher, which is a $2,000 game, because that's a Hideo Kojima game that never came to any other platforms.
Oh, right. Yeah.
In North America. So there's they've got a gold mine of good stuff on that console. And it looks like it's going to be a really sweet collection of games, especially if you like RPGs, because they've already announced a bunch of them for it as well, like Shining in the Darkness, like the Lunar games, like Shining Force CD. So I think it's going to be a really good mini console for RPG fans, especially because, again, most people didn't play Sega CD games like me. I'm definitely the outlier when it comes to, people who played old consoles with the Sega CD.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder how much Nintendo will expand their Switch Online because all the like I'm down for some more RPG, older RPGs, Sega related games because I'm not gonna be like you. I'm not gonna be like everyone else that's gonna get these mini consoles. I think they're cool.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's like, I don't want to like buy a separate. Aren't they on like Sega Genesis collection or whatever?
None
The
of the Sega CD
museum?
games are. This is the very first time the
I
Sega
see.
CD games have been ported to literally anything besides the Sega CD. So
Okay, wow.
that's
Okay,
that's
so
why
this
this is a
this will
big
be
deal.
pretty valuable, I think.
Yeah, I think
Wow.
so. Because
Okay.
especially like when scalpers get a hold of them, like, it just depends on how many of them they make, of course. But
Hmm.
I do think it's going to be like a very like cost-effective console if you want to get into these RPGs. But at the same time, because they've done the emulation work here, I do hope what this translates into is what you were just talking about, Garrett. I really hope that
Yeah.
because they've gone through the effort of porting these games through emulation, that they've also put them on Switch Online. Because that's exactly what happened when we saw with the games that are now, because almost all of them are in the Sega Genesis collection,
Yeah,
or on the
pretty much.
Sega Genesis Mini 1, like Mega Man The Wily
Mhm.
Wars, for example, that just came to
Isn't that
Nintendo
crazy?
Switch Online. That the
Yeah.
only other way to get that was on the Sega Genesis Mini, the original, or if you had Sega Channel back in the day. So you've got stuff like that. That's why I think
That's
they
so
will
crazy.
probably do Sega CD as part of that at some point, which I'm hopeful for because that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think Sega is understanding what they have in terms of like they have some nostalgia with the hardcore audience, but I like how they're making it pretty accessible and pretty like wide variety, slowly trickling these games out that were like as you said very hard to reach now.
Mhm.
I think yeah, I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah, like the Sega CD is just a console where it's like there are so many great games just stranded there that a lot of people just miss because at the time people were so into games like Night Trap or like FMV games because that was all the rage
I
back then,
remember Night Trap. Yeah.
or just people just wanting to avoid the console altogether because they didn't want to play games like that. But there's a lot of great stuff on there that just a lot of people miss because of that. But enough
Hmm.
about reminiscing about the Sega CD, Garrett. I could talk about the Sega CD all
We
day.
could
It's no
talk
problem at all.
forever.
Garrett, what's your next game? What do you got for me?
All right, my next one is I got to shout out a Fire Emblem game. It's one of my favorite Fire Emblem games actually in the franchise, and that's Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valencia, which
Ooh.
is actually a remake of the 1992 Famicom game Fire Emblem Gaiden. And of course, Ryan Turford is there with the special edition. I also have that special edition.
It's very nice.
One of the few. Yeah, it's very, very nice. Has an art book and everything. I really enjoyed the story of this game, Ryan. They did a really good job of modernizing uh, this Fire Emblem game. It is definitely in the same engine as Fire Emblem Fates and Awakening on the 3DS. They did a really good job at the voice acting and the story and the presentation of this game. It performed really well. The novelty behind this game compared to the previous ones is that when you get into castles, these castles kind of have like this dungeon run going on where like each floor has like different sets of monsters and then like it's real time. Like you're actually moving. Um, I had the new 3DS, so I had the C stick going on, and you're actually moving that C stick to move left and right in camera and just going forward and backward. Like it was real time in these castle dungeon runs. And then once you face a monster, you go into battle, and it's just this mini battle. It's not like a huge battle like we're normal with Fire Emblem games. The big novelty also behind this, it's split between two main characters. There's a guy and a girl protagonists, and they are together, and then they split off and back together throughout the entire game. There is no relationship or baby waifu system like we've seen before. It's very stripped down as so yeah, the core mechanic of it really rooted on that original Fire Emblem game, but man, they did such a good job of presentation, graphics, voice acting, and just everything else on top of it to make it really playable on the 3DS. So yeah, I love the music too. The soundtrack of this game is out of this world. I really like this one. So yeah, Fire Emblem Shadows of Valencia. really good, really good.
Yeah, that was actually one that was one of my honorable mentions as well. All the points you just discussed, Garrett. I think it's also a really great remake, and it takes a game that would be really hard to go back to with the original Famicom version, and then just updates it for modern standards. And all to your point, I love the voice acting. I love the cinematics that are in it as well. All the little like bells and whistles that they added to this version, I think, were really well done. So I'm glad that you included it here as well, because I think it's a great Fire Emblem game as well, and it's very different from the other Fire Emblem games that we've had as well. So if you've gotten burned out by the Fire Emblem formula and you've never played Shadows of Valentia, maybe that's one to try out to get you back into.
Yeah, it's a very it's one of the more simple Fire Emblem games that works really well. It's back to its very tactical roots. So if you don't care for Three Houses day-night cycle and you don't care about Awakening and Fate's relationship status stuff, this is probably the game you want to go after for Fire Emblem.
Definitely. Well, sticking with the tactics theme, Garrett, I've got two more games left, and my last two games, spoiler alert, are PSP games, so please get excited for that. I've got Final Fantasy Tactics: The War of the Lions on the PSP. So this is actually a remake of the original Final Fantasy Tactics from PlayStation 1, but kind of like what you talked about with Shadows of Valentia, they simplified things. They made it a little bit easier to play this one, because there were some obtuse things with the way that the original game kind of controlled, and they also added some gorgeous like hand-drawn cinematics to the game, which look great today, especially going back and playing this now. Like, it's a very beautiful looking game, and of course it's Final Fantasy Tactics, so you know it's a good game. Like, it's a very like tough but fair tactical RPG, and it's a lot of fun still today. Like, I love Final Fantasy Tactics, and it's very different from from the Fire Emblems or Shining Forces, because a lot of it has to do with elevation. So you have to you're trying to kind of get like the height advantage over some of your enemies, especially if you've got like an archer or something like that. So yeah, I love Final Fantasy Tactics, and this remake is one of the best remakes that's out there of that game, and it's definitely like, if you were to ask me today, Ryan, how should I play Final Fantasy Tactics? I've never played it before. Play the PSP version. It's like night and day better than the PlayStation 1 version. So.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. They even added some little content to it as well. There's some special characters as well from another Final Fantasy game that I'm not going to spoil as well. But if you've played it before, you probably know what I'm talking about. But there you go.
I heard there's some rumors that's going to get ported over.
Yeah.
That would be
It's on... Cool. It's on the NVIDIA leak, but I mean, they could just even add it to PlayStation Plus with the lineup as well. Who knows? With the premium.
I wouldn't like that. But yeah. Cool, man. I would like to play that game sometime. It's just, for me, it's kind of, I would probably get I think I have it on Vita, actually. I bought it through the PlayStation Store on Vita, so I'll have to definitely check Final Fantasy Tactics out. Was there one on GBA as well?
There is one on GBA, but it's like it's its own thing. It's about these kids in a schoolyard that are basically trying to tell the Final Fantasy Tactics story, but it's like totally different. It's a totally different game. It's almost like it's almost like a spin-off.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right, Garrett, hit me with your last game.
My last game, one more thing for me, and I have to shout it out. And it's probably not like the most impressive advancement, but I think it was needed for sure. And that's Skyrim Special Edition. I love that thing to death. So that got released, I believe it was 2016. It was 5-year anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a 5-year anniversary thing. Came out on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. And what Skyrim Special Edition did is, let's take Skyrim, let's put all the DLC, pack it into one, package or whatever. One thing is the load times are much shorter than the original game. The other thing is that the textures were sharper. It had like a lot more fog and lighting around the land in Skyrim. It was much more playable. I think the other biggest thing behind this game is mod support. There was a lot of mod support behind both the Xbox and PC community. And that's where kind of a lot of the mods that we know today in Skyrim, the essential ones, it's based off of that plugin and also just Skyrim Special Edition. Like Special Edition is the base version now. And so yeah, I really enjoyed that game. And if someone tell me, hey, how do I play Skyrim? Where do I play on? It's like you play Skyrim Special Edition, you're doing just fine. Like Anniversary Edition, I don't know what they're trying to do. They're just trying to put little, trinkets and everything or whatnot. Just play the Special Edition. Plays really well on the consoles, also on Switch, also on PC. Like no matter what, Skyrim Special Edition. I remember going through that in 2016. And it's like, man, so much better than my experience in the Xbox 360.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And of course the unplayable PS3 version. But yeah, I have to shout out Skyrim Special Edition. Yeah.
It's like I knew. It's like I knew we couldn't get it through an entire episode without talking about Skyrim again. But seriously, to your point, I also think it's a good re-release of Skyrim as well. Again, it doesn't, add a ton of stuff, but what it adds is good for the game, whether it's the mods or the DLC and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of good stuff with the Special Edition. And to your point, the Anniversary Edition, it's like, I think they're just trying to sell you a bunch of the mods and then, other little stuff in the game as well, essentially. So it's fine.
It was rough seeing the Anniversary Edition. It's like, okay, that's a mod. Okay, that's another mod. But like you playing the Xbox version or the PlayStation version of Special Edition, you can get mods very similar like that, even better. I remember there was a mod on Xbox where you don't have to load into towns or whatever. You just open the door and it's there. It's like very essential stuff. It was cool like that. But the one caveat of mods is that you don't get your trophies or achievements once you turn those mods on. Yeah, so I had a little bit of struggle of turning mods on because I would love to have the achievements on there. I would love to go back to Skyrim. I played a lot on Xbox and Skyrim and on Switch. Also, Xbox has I think it's the 60 frames patch on Skyrim. That's the FPS boost. So, and it performs just beautifully on the Series X. It's like instant load in times now. So, yeah, definitely play it.
And with mods, Special that's edition. The type of thing where it's like, I think you probably do a run where you get all of the achievements first, or as many of them as you can, and then you turn mods on. Then you just go do wacky stuff.
You just go crazy.
You summon Thomas the Tank Engine in there, or whatever crazy stuff you want to put into Skyrim at that point.
Yeah, there's Skyforge, there's like a Skyblivion, there's so many like mods that like here's an extra chunk of land that we've loaded into the game and we can do it on Xbox. I don't know about PlayStation, they're a little restrictive, but Xbox and PC has all that. Have you heard of the newest mod on Skyrim? It was like Skyrim Play Together or something like that.
No, I don't know about this one. Tell me about it.
So it just happened last week. They announced a mod. I think it's just on PC right now, but it's a multiplayer Skyrim where you're able to have people together in one server. I think it's up to 8 players or something, but you're just playing Skyrim the game with 8 players. As long as you all have the game, you're gonna play Skyrim together. And I think that's more or less a dream come true for a lot of Skyrim fans out there. They've been asking for this for a very long time, and someone figured it out, and they did a pretty good job. I think there was some bugs or trinkets that sometimes things get stuck. Of course, you use PC and commands and like kind of bypass around like a locked door or something like that. But I heard it's a really solid start for a mod for a multiplayer Skyrim. So check it out. I forgot exactly what the name is. It's like Skyrim Play Together or whatever. But yeah, the modding community for Special Edition is outrageous for Xbox.
That sounds awesome. that someone just made a multiplayer suite for Skyrim just on their own in like the mods client. I think that's like really rad when people come up with cool stuff like that. So excited to see how that actually plays in practice, because I can't even imagine like how the servers would even work for that, and like what type of maintenance goes into that, like all kinds of crazy stuff I can imagine.
Well, one person hosts the server and everyone just comes
so it's peer to peer. Okay.
Yeah, and I think like the progression is like an instant save too, like with your profile. Like so if you ever split apart, your progression sticks as
Okay.
well. It's and but they kind of tuned the game a little bit. Like they've added more items or loot inside the monsters, and they actually the normal difficulty is hard difficulty in this game because you got multiple people together and you're able to defeat like one monster together.
Yeah, it's got to
Yeah,
ratchet it up at least a little bit, or else
yeah,
it
yeah,
would be
yeah.
too overpowered. But all right,
Mhm.
well, moving on to my last game, Garrett. I don't actually have a physical copy of the remake itself, but I do have the original copy on my shelf here.
Oh,
It's another Sega CD game that was ported to the PSP.
Oh.
So I got Lunar, the Silver Star, held up here. Which,
Got
by
it.
the way, also in the Sega Genesis Mini 2. Just saying, fantastic game. But there was a PSP remake of it called Lunar Silver Star Harmony. And there's been multiple remakes of the original Lunar for a while because we did get Lunar Silver Star Story complete on the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation 1. But then they remade it again for the PSP. But what was interesting about the PSP one, the reason I picked that over the PlayStation 1 version, is it basically has all the advantages of the PlayStation 1 version, but then it also has an entirely new scenario that takes place at the beginning of the game that basically fills you in on some backstory of some questions that we've had in regards to some of the stories that was left unanswered in the main game. That it then allows you to play through this entire playable sequence that's kind of like a prequel to the game. But then they've also simplified the combat in a big way because the PlayStation 1 version relied a little too much on grinding. Whereas they refined the PlayStation Portable version to have less grinding in it, but it still has these like gorgeous like visuals as well to the game because it is more like a almost like a hand-drawn approach to like a 16-bit game in a lot of ways is how I would describe what the PSP version or the PlayStation 1 version looks like. But it's got like great full motion cinematics. It's got great music, although there's some questionable stuff in there. But I love the PSP version. I think it's a great version of the game. It's a great way to play Lunar as well. If you've heard me rant about Lunar for a while and you don't know where to start, the PSP version is definitely the way to go, I would say. It is also on mobile phones as well. So if you have a phone, like if you have a tablet, you can play it on either iOS or Android. There is a version of that. I think it's like $10 there as well. So you can definitely play it in both places, but got to play it on the PSP or eventually if it comes to PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4 in the PlayStation Classics lineup, which would be awesome too. But I love the remake. I think it's really good. And again, just to what I talked about with Trials of Mana or Final Fantasy, I mean, it pays homage to the original game in a lot of great ways while also fixing some of the little nitpicky stuff you'd have from the first game. Like you don't have to worry about, going through 4 or 5 menus full of, spells to look up a specific spell on a specific turn and stuff like that. So there's some good additions made there, but had to throw that in there because it's one of my all-time favorite games.
Ryan, I'm sorry if I didn't catch this. Is Lunar an action or turn-based RPG?
Turn-based RPG.
Turn-based. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I know you've been mentioning Lunar a lot, and I get the vibe from it. Like I can see it in my head. It's like, but what is it though? Is it turn-based or an action?
Yeah, it's a very traditional turn-based RPG, but
Cool.
the way the battlefield works is it's almost like D&D in a way where your characters appear in like almost like a V-shaped pattern on the map. And then your enemies are a certain distance away, and then you have to, in order to do physical attacks, let's say, you have to run up to the enemy and attack them, but your characters can only move so far depending on what their move stat is set to. So there's a little bit of strategy that plays into the way you play the game as well, because likewise, you can also flee from enemies and run to the other side of the screen so that they can't melee you if you're worried about, your characters taking too much damage or something like that. So it plays with the turn-based mechanics in a really interesting way, which I really like. And you definitely don't see that in a lot of other turn-based RPGs as well.
I would definitely like to try it out sometime.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Garrett, I'm going to interrupt the podcast because we got our very first super chat ever on this channel. So recently, youtube.com/carpoolgaming leveled up. We actually became YouTube partners, and we have the ability now to receive super chats. You've also probably noticed there's ads on the videos now as well. Sorry about that, but we got to do what we got to do.
We had to do it.
But Yarden with the $1.99 saying, "Hey, I see the channel has leveled up. Congrats, Yarden. Thanks so much for coming up here and being super nice." Yarden's always been, super nice to us and been a great
supportive
member of this community. So huge shout out to Yarden for being awesome. And sorry for derailing the show at least a little bit like that, Garrett. But enough about Lunar. I'm going to run through real quick my honorable mentions. I don't think you have any more games, right, Garrett? You went through your 4?
Well, I have. I mean, you can mention honorable mentions, but I do have physical copies of other games I need to play. And I'll play one for sure later this year. That's Persona 5 Royal. I did get the Steel Case edition, of course, on PS4. And Valkyria Chronicles Remastered on PS4. I got this forever ago, actually in 2016, I think, and I still need to play it. So
those are 2 really good games, Garrett. One day. That's like 150 hours of game you just held up right there.
Well, Persona 5 will definitely be played on Xbox. I cannot wait to play it on Game Pass.
Same. I'm actually gonna. I think I mentioned it before to you, but I'm gonna replay it again when it comes to Xbox. Just to send a message that we want Persona on Xbox, and I want all those 1,000 achievements.
That's exactly why I'm doing it on Xbox. Like, we need JRPGs on Xbox. I will play it on Xbox. You gave it to me, Microsoft. You gave it to me on Game Pass. I will play it through Game Pass.
Yeah.
And I'll make my voice loud and clear.
I'm also doing the same thing next month too, because Soul Hackers 2 is coming out, and I'm going to be playing that on Xbox too, which I'm very excited about that game on Xbox. That's going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I'm going to throw in my honorable mentions real quick, and then we'll get to some of the listener ones, because we got some great, listener inquiries. So honorable mention number 1, Chrono Trigger for the Nintendo DS, which might sound strange, but I believe that's actually I think that's the definitive way to play Chrono Trigger, if I'm being honest, because they added an extra dungeon and some extra stuff that, again, doesn't feel like it's totally out of the way, but the way the control scheme works in the DS version. Plus, you get the cinematics from the PlayStation 1 version, but without any of the load times from the PlayStation 1 version of Chrono Trigger. It's like, to me, it's like the definitive way to play Chrono Trigger in a lot of ways, which is too bad because they didn't make enough copies of them, and they're very expensive now. But that game's really, really good.
Yes,
but I'm going to throw out a real secret tip, though. If you want to actually play the Chrono Trigger DS version, the Japanese release of Chrono Trigger DS has the English language on it. So you can just play...
You can just translate it.
But it's already translated for you. Like it's like they have the English localization on the Japanese cartridge for whatever reason. So you can just import that and play it on your DS instead, and it works.
There you go.
But then another one I've got a prop for, Valkyrie Profile Lilith, which we're actually going to be getting on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 pretty soon with the collector's edition of Valkyrie Elysium coming out this September. It's a remake of the original Valkyrie Profile from PlayStation 1. The reason it didn't make my top 5 and it's in my honorable mentions instead is because they made some modifications that aren't amazing, but at the same time, I have to include it here because the original Valkyrie Profile is way too expensive, and I do really like the new cutscenes they added to the PSP version, and I do think it's a great addition as well. Next up, the Shining Force remake, Shining Force Rise of Dark Dragon, which it was done by Atlas on the Game Boy Advance. So it's a remake of the very first Shining Force game, but made by Atlas. And what they did is they added a bunch of extra story stuff and new characters and a lot of great changes to the original Shining Force, while also still making it feel like a great experience and not like it doesn't feel like there's too much padding or anything like that. Because that's one thing I always get a little bit worried about if a company adds too much content to a game. It's kind of like Final Fantasy for a remake. But then my last one, I'm cheating with this one because this isn't actually technically a remaster, Garrett. But at the same time, it feels so substantial that I would qualify it as a remaster that you didn't have to pay for, and that is Final Fantasy 13 on Xbox One X or Xbox Series X, because what they did with this game, Garrett, is they went back, Square Enix did, and they totally took redid all the cutscenes for the game, so now they're in full 4K as opposed to being in 540p on Xbox 360. They improved all the load times. They improved a ton of stuff with this game. So even though It's not technically a remaster that you buy separately. It's just the game that you bought before. It's such a huge upgrade that it feels even bigger than something like Skyrim Special Edition. So I had to include it here as well. So there you go.
I heard the bump up of that game is kind of crazy. 4K textures from 540p.
Yeah, well,
wow.
Not just the textures, the cinematics too. We're all like 540p and like super compressed before, whereas now they look gorgeous. Like that game looks like a brand new game, like it just came out or something like that. So,
wow,
yeah, but
good for them.
Anyways, let's let some of our listeners in with us. Folks at home, by the way, I like to do this every once in a while. If you'd like to submit your questions to the RPG Cave or your suggestions, head over to our Discord. The link is in the show notes if you're watching it on YouTube or on podcast feeds. Or you hit us up on Twitter at Carpool Gaming. We put up a question post every single Monday, just like Ngachacha at Ngachacha on Twitter did. And again, we've got even a couple questions that aren't even about remakes, which we'll get to in a little bit. But first off, with our remakes and remastered suggestions, we've got Ngachacha saying, we all know Final Fantasy VII Remake is fantastic, but I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite games of all time, which is a remaster of an action RPG that is NieR Replicant version 1.22474487139. The brand new ending left me in tears for days. I actually really like that remake as well, Ngachacha. It's one that kind of flew under the radar last year, and not a lot of people actually ended up playing it, because I remember it came out in April of last year, like on the same day as something else that was really big last year that I'm forgetting, which is why just a lot of people skipped over this one. But I think it's a great remake of the original NieR, so definitely a good shout out, Ngachacha. Did you play this one at all, Garrett? I don't think you did.
No. I was gonna wait till it went on sale. Now it's on sale, so
yeah,
we'll see.
One day.
But those numbers, man, like that's Japan for you. 12247448719 Okay.
I mean, Ngachacha went through the effort of putting them out here on the question.
You had to
I had to read them out. You know. Well,
there's some meaning behind it.
Exactly. Well, next up we got Blaze Knight, who says, a few of my favorite remakes/remasters are Final Fantasy VI on Nintendo DS, and he says to crank up the difficulty to 11 on this one. And then the GBA remasters of Breath of Fire and Breath of Fire 2, which apparently turns the grinding down, like basically cuts the grinding in half. And then Shining Force on GPA, like I mentioned, adding story-relevant characters and new mechanics. And then he even has some suggestions for some remakes he'd like to see at some point. He'd love to see Chrono Cross, Secret of Mana, and Fire Emblem Shadows of Valencia get full remakes. And then he'd love to see remasters of the Lunar series. Thank you, Blaze Knight, for validating me at least a little bit. He also mentions the Lufia series, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And then Fire Emblem Path of Radiance / Radiant Dawn. Yes.
Oh, that would be new.
Blaze Knight. Yeah. Those need to come to other consoles besides the Wii and the GameCube. Please.
Yes, please.
All right. Next up, Skycatcher Game, who, by the way, was in the chat a little bit earlier. I don't know if they're still here, but huge shout out to them, because this is the first time I think submitting. Never mind. The Good Sir is the first time they're submitting. But Skycatcher Game, I know you're new to the community, so welcome in, Juan, and hope you're having an awesome night.
Thank you.
Skycatcher Game says, well, I've only played one remaster or remake, and that's Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology on 3DS. I've never played the DS version, but I heard that the art style is great, so someday I'll play it. I'd love to see remasters of the Tales games that are not on PlayStation 4 or Switch. Also, all of the Mario and Luigi RPGs on Switch, please.
That would be cool.
Yeah. We've talked about this. I talked about this with Kevin actually 2 weeks ago, where we were just pouring our hearts out about like what Tales games
about the GameCube
we would love to see come back.
The Tales. Okay. Yeah.
And I would love to see more of those come back. And Mario and Luigi RPGs, I think they're fun too. Did you ever play any of the Mario and Luigi RPGs, Garrett? On Game Boy or
played
DS?
a few. Yeah, I played a few on the DS. I actually had the 3DS XL Mario and Luigi Dream Team. Ooh. I think that was it. Yeah,
it was.
I played that. Yeah, I played that back in the day. I don't particularly care for them too much because, like South Park and everything else, I don't know why. I just don't like the action button cues as much as a typical turn-based RPG. I'd rather be like, here's an action RPG, here's a turn-based RPG. But there's some in-betweens that a lot of people really enjoy. Those button queues and this a little bit more interaction in there. So yeah.
Yeah, I that makes a lot of sense, especially because like when you're playing a turn-based game, you can at least relax a little bit. But when you're like halfway between action RPG and turn-based RPGs, it can be a little bit weird and a little bit jarring. But I actually like some of those games, not all of them, but like Bowser's Inside Story, for example, I think it's a great game, as well as the first one on GBA, I think it's really good too. But they definitely went in some weird directions with that one, like Dream Team, for example. So they're kind of hit or miss, I think. But next up, The Good Sir. First time, short time here. Welcome to the community, Good Sir. I know you just picked up the podcast a few weeks ago. You'd mentioned in the Discord, so welcome as well. The Good Sir says, there have been some incredible RPG remakes and remasters over the year. Two of my favorites, unsurprisingly, are Dark Cloud 1 and 2 remastered for PlayStation 4, mostly for the opportunity to replay them with trophies, which is a great feature. I'm glad that they're there. That Dark Cloud 2 Platinum is ridiculous and I'll never get it, but I snagged the Dark Cloud 1 Platinum. Amazing franchise. Would love to see a third entry. And in fact, the Good Sir went on the Discord, Garrett. I don't know if you saw this while you were away, but they had mentioned that they want us to do a Dark Cloud episode at some point. Like they were like very excited about that. But,
The Good Sir, you can come in and please gush over this franchise I have no familiarity with.
To be fair, I haven't really played them since the PlayStation 2 era. So even I am like not like totally up to date on them. But we did talk about, him and I actually talked about like maybe doing like a level 5 episode, which is level 5 were the creators of that game. So, and I think you probably played some level 5 games. So that might be.
Yes, I remember seeing a list and playing some of their games for sure.
Yeah. And then last of our remake/remaster suggestions, and this one comes with a question as well, comes to us from the Muffin One, aka Kevin Ainsworth. Shout out to, again, Kevin for coming on the show a couple weeks ago. He says, I loved the remakes of older JRPGs lately. Obviously, Final Fantasy VII Remake is amazing, but Trials of Mana was a very underrated game in my opinion. I played through that game for all of the routes and loved it. And my question is, what JRPG do you want to see a remake of? I would actually love to see a Golden Sun or Chrono Trigger remake to bring it into the modern era. So he specifically prefaced JRPGs. So to give you time to think, Garrett, I came up with a list of remakes/remasters.
Oh, you have a list, of course.
Well, I saw this question ahead of time, so I made sure to prepare for it at least a little bit. So,
sounds good.
Have some time to think about this while I spout some of these off. So first off, I've said this one a million times on the show. I'm not going to go into why again, but it's Parasite Eve. That's, it's a survival horror game that's also a turn-based RPG, and it's amazing, and it's stranded on the PlayStation 1, and it's not on anything else, and it needs a full remake. So Parasite Eve is one that I want to see. But then here's where I go into crazier territory, which I haven't talked about before. Speaking of the Shining Force train that I talked about earlier, Shining Force 3, I think, would be a great candidate for a remake from Sega. So Shining Force 3, for those that aren't familiar, it was a trio of Sega Saturn games, similar to what I talked about with Shining Force CD, how it was a remake of 3 Game Gear games. Shining Force 3 was kind of the same way, where it was 3 full games on the Sega Saturn, but only one of the 3 of them came out in North America, and the other 2 were Japan only. So you got to the end of the game where it kind of left on a cliffhanger, and we never got to see the rest of it because it never came out here, because we never got the other 2 games. So I would love to see Sega go back and do kind of like they did with Shining Force CD, where they do like one modern game that's in the traditional, turn-based Shining Force style that brings together those 3 games. I think would be amazing. So I got those.
I don't understand Shining Force, the franchise, anymore, Ryan.
Yeah.
You're saying that Shining Force CD is 3 games, and you're saying Shining Force 3 is also 3 games.
Yeah.
What is this? This kind of dark hole tactical RPG franchise have you crawled me into? That's like shut.
So the difference is
this to the Sega franchise. Oh my gosh! Yeah.
With the Game Gear games in particular, even though they weren't numbered, they weren't numbered the same or anything like that. They weren't supposed to be tied together. They are supposed to be 3 separate games. They just have characters that cross over into the 3 games. But it's going much farther in time and whatnot. Whereas Shining Force 3 is literally Shining Force 3 Part 1, Shining Force 3 Part 2, and Shining Force 3 Part 3. So it's like 3 kind of like direct sequels that are supposed to be one game, but they split them into 3 games because money. So that's
okay. Yeah.
That's why. But which is why, again, I think that would be amazing to see them in one game. I think that would be a great move for Sega. But then I've got a couple of collections to suggest. Number one, and this is a series I've been really hankering to revisit, Garrett, and that's the Lufia series from the Super Nintendo. You've probably never heard of Lufia before because it's a very old
I've heard of it.
franchise. Ooh. Lufia 1 and 2, I think, are amazing turn-based RPGs on the Super Nintendo, and it got some, not so great sequels in the form of a GBA game and a DS game, but the first 2 Lufia games are amazing. But I would love to see like a Lufia collection come at some point, because as like with a lot of other games I've talked about today, you just can't play them anywhere else. You have to play them on their original consoles, and all the games are very expensive. So I would love to see that at some point. Another collection in the similar vein, Sakura Wars. I'd love to see a Sakura Wars collection. That's a bunch of Sega Saturn games that never came to North America. We did eventually get the series on the Wii with its first entry, and then eventually we got the reboot of Sakura Wars 2 years ago in 2020. So I would love to see them maybe, bring the series back, do a collection, get some of those Japanese games over here. And then the last one, I've talked about this one in other shows before. I would love to see a Xenosaga collection with those 3 games from the PlayStation 2. But Garrett, do you have any other games you want to add to my pile of suggestions?
Of your pile of unending remakes that you want?
Yeah.
No, it's really good stuff. A lot of great JRPGs there. I'll just pick up what Blaze Knight said. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Those are like the 2 games I would really like remastered and ported onto the Switch. I would gobble both of those up, $60 each easily. That's where Roy and Ike are kind of introduced into the franchise, and I would just be super into them. And also like those were it was kind of weird. Those were main console Fire Emblem games before I got into the franchise.
Yeah.
And now they're kind of shut off and you got to spend how much money you can on these physical editions to play on old hardware. And I'm like, you know what? Let me just, I did play some of it emulated, and I'm like, no, I need to play this like portably. I need this on Switch. So I've been waiting it out. So hopefully, Intelligent Systems like knock some sense to them and just get these games out on Switch would be amazing. Another thing, definitely Chrono Trigger is a big one. I loved it on SNES, but I really like I can just see it now, that HD 2D art with Chrono Trigger, it would be excellent because the way you cross around throughout the map on this 2D map of Chrono Trigger can easily be translatable to have a third axis, and you can have like a ladder going up and have some depth to it, and it would still look great because it had that pixel art behind it and the shading. It would look gorgeous, and I think Square Enix knows that, and they're like, we cannot mess this up, so we're gonna perfect other games in this style, then we'll hit Chrono Trigger pretty soon. I think it's coming. I think the Chrono Trigger HD2D will happen in the next 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a reality. The last one I want to mention, and I've been asking for this for a pretty long time now. I want a remastered. I want them to go back and start remaking the remakes of Pokemon games. I mentioned Fire Red and Leaf Green were my favorite remakes, and they still hold true. I really love those. Let's do that again. Let's make it more like another modernized version of Pokemon whatever, the first gen. I absolutely hated Pokemon Let's Go. I know a lot of people love it, and I'm like, no, this is not Pokemon. Like, you can say it's Pokemon, but it's really not in my eyes. So I would really like a fresh out remake of the first gen and second gen Pokemon games. That would be really cool. I'm kind of done remaking these gens. The fourth gen kind of it's kind of stale. It was like I went through it and I'm like, it was a new studio too, so I don't want to like harp on them too much because they are not the Pokemon studio.
Mhm.
So I understand that was their project and it was a safe project and they played the safe route. And they actually put all of that in Unity as well. So that was kind of just a weird thing altogether. But I would really like the Pokemon studio just go back and just do the first gen again. That would be so cool. But
I
that's
mean,
just me.
you tell them to stop, Garrett, but I'm very excited that one day in 2027, we're going to get Pokemon, Super X and Mega Y. And I'm very excited for the day that because it's going to happen, Garrett. They will go back and remake those games because, people in 2027, 2028 will be like super nostalgic for X and Y because those are the Pokemon games they grew up with. Like,
yeah, for the game I was in college for.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Like, you say this, but that's what happened with the original Pokemon for me, Garrett. So
that's true. You're right.
Yeah. So it'll happen.
I gotta shout those out.
But
yeah, definitely.
They can't help themselves. But also, fun fact: I was looking at some auctions the other day because I browse eBay auctions from time to time, and I saw one going for Fire Emblem Path of Radiance on there, Garrett, and it was going for 850 Canadian dollars complete in box, and the disc, there was pictures of the disc and it was totally like scratched up. So I'm like, man, what does a clean version of this go for? Like, I don't even know anymore.
It's gonna be a lot more money. That's crazy. Yeah, that's really crazy.
That's kind of ridiculous. But anyways, let's bring in our last two questions. And these have nothing to do with HD remakes or remasters. We're going to start with Skinny Matt, who asked the question, can we please get a proper/good console port of Chrono Trigger? No, Skinny Matt. That's never going to happen.
I'm sorry.
I'm less optimistic than Garrett is. Whereas if they do bring Chrono Trigger back at all, I actually think Garrett's on the right track where it will be like a full remake rather than them porting it. Especially after some stuff I've seen with Nate the Hate talking about, because Nate the Hate's like an industry insider. He talks about a bunch of different things and stuff like that. And one of the things he was mentioning is there's some hangups between the people that own the IP for Chrono Trigger. In the way that, I mean, that's the reason we haven't seen it re-released on Switch Online or really anything beyond the PC re-release that we saw many, many moons ago. And I think it has to do with the director and the composer kind of clashing on some stuff. So until that stuff gets sorted out, I don't think we'll ever get like a new version of this at some point. But I would love to see that because I love Chrono Trigger and I would love to be able to play it on something besides the Nintendo DS. But until then,
Matt, emulate it. Just do it. Just put on a Retro Pocket. Just put on your SNES, your mini SNES. Just do it.
The main thing is just don't play the PlayStation 1 version. It really is okay. Just don't do that, but do everything else. But
yeah. Don't play the PlayStation 1 version, right?
Yeah, don't play that.
That's the bad version.
It's got load times.
Yeah,
it's got really bad load times whenever you go into every battle in that game. So
that just breaks the flow hardcore. Yeah, it's okay, Matt.
All right, and then the last question comes to us from the Winter Gamer, aka Brendan Myers, who says, what RPG grabbed your attention from first sight, but when you got into it, you realized you made a mistake? Did you end up finishing the game, restarting it, or trying again, or did you walk away? For me, it was Xenoblade Chronicles on the Wii, where I started and got the hang of the combat, but then I saw the selling price, so I sold it to fund my next 3 games. I later picked it up on 3DS, because it launched on my birthday, and it was a new 3DS exclusive, and I only regretted it because of the limitations of the 3DS, but I loved the portability. I'm still looking to finish it to this day. So, Garrett, do you have a story like this about an RPG where you realized you made a mistake picking up that game?
I wouldn't say a mistake. It's just there's a lot of JRPGs that I try to get into. I'm like, I'm not feeling this right now. And I think one of them, I wish I had more patience for. It was back in 2010. I think that's when it got released. 2010 or late DS or whatever. It was Dragon Quest 9 that came out on the DS. And so that one was actually, like, I tried it out a little bit and the pacing was just very slow. It had that classic Dragon Quest feel to it. I didn't know what was going on, like what kind of like where to go and like what to do. It seemed very obtuse to me compared to a Pokemon game. So because back in that like during that time, I just didn't really get into other like JRPGs than Pokemon, to be
Mm.
honest with you. So like yeah, so I heard Dragon Quest was a big thing. I got the DS physical version. I'm like, okay, I'll try this franchise out, and I just didn't really get into it. I definitely want to try out Dragon Quest 11. I have it on Switch, so I'll get to it and play. I don't expect to finish it. I've heard it's like
Yeah,
over 100 hours, and
it's
I'm like, you know
ridiculous.
what?
I
I'll
think it's
try it.
longer than Persona 5. So
I've heard. Yeah, so I'll try it out, see what it's like. But I don't think the Dragon Quest franchise was ever for me after I tried to play 9. I heard great things about the game or about the franchise itself. It's just not for my taste.
yeah,
So,
like it's almost like if the Dragon Quest franchise to me is like what would have happened if Final Fantasy never moved away from turn-based is exactly what would happen with
yeah.
Dragon Quest. Because Final Fantasy went, and tried a whole bunch of different stuff and went in the action RPG direction, and then Dragon Quest has remained exactly the same from Dragon Quest
Yeah,
1 to
exactly
Dragon
the
Quest
same.
11 at this point. So,
Hmm.
yeah. As for me, I've got two. The first one, I've told the story before in episode 1 of the RPG Cave, where I rented Genghis Khan on the NES, and that that we realized we made a mistake when we rented that for the first time, and that turned me off RPGs for
Yeah.
8 or 9 years until I eventually discovered through Sega Channel that Shining Force 2 is a really good game and that RPGs are a genre I should actually start playing. So it kind of scarred me for life. So that's kind of the biggest example, but I'll tell a story that I haven't told before. And that has to do with a game that, one, I know a lot of people really like, but I am not one of the people that really like this game. And number two, it's super fresh in my mind because one of my roommates has been playing said game recently. And
Oh.
she also does not like this game very much either. So, but she continues to play it anyways, regardless. So that game is Final Fantasy X. So Final Fantasy X.
No, that's a bad game. Sorry,
You say
keep
this,
on
Garrett,
going,
but
Ryan.
for a lot of people, that's like some of either their favorite Final Fantasy game of all time, or
I
I've heard
know.
people say it's their favorite game of all time. Like IGN's Tinia Mini,
gosh.
for example, who was the former editor-in-chief of IGN, her favorite game of all time is Final Fantasy X, for example.
What blasphemy, but keep on going.
Yeah, so I ended up buying the game, as soon as I could get it on PlayStation 2, being all excited for it because it was a big leap in graphics for Final Fantasy, and I just really wanted to get into, a new Final Fantasy game. It had been a long time between, 9 and 10 as well, so it had been a long time since we had a new Final Fantasy game, and it was just really disappointing, but that's not where the story actually comes in and where kind of the mistake happened, because I very promptly realized, okay, I just can't get into it. It's not for me. Between the Blitzball and the terrible voice acting and the way the combat's a little bit weird, I just couldn't get into that game. But then when the remasters of Final Fantasy X came out, I was like, okay, I'm gonna buy these day one, thinking I can get back into this because maybe it's been so many years since Final Fantasy X came out, and I've heard so many people tell me that no, you need to give Final Fantasy X a chance because it's great and you should really go back to it. I'm like, okay, I will spend full price on this remake, hoping that you're correct and I will really get into it this time. And no, I actually fell off even harder this time, and I realized as soon as I started playing it again, I'm like, this was a mistake. And then I could no longer refund the game at that point because I bought it digitally and I bought it on PlayStation, so you couldn't refund it. So I was kind of just stuck with it at that point. So I ended up playing it again. Believe it or not, I actually got more into Final Fantasy X 2 instead of 10. But even then, I don't like those games very much. And I'm sorry to folks at home. I know people like that game, and I know it's going to sound like blasphemy, but I'm sorry. I couldn't get into that game.
Don't be sorry, Ryan. You are correct. Final Fantasy X. I guys, I don't know what you see in this. It's so not good. Like it's so I wouldn't say bad. Like it's so mediocre, and then you got Blitzball in there.
Yeah.
And it just knocks me out. I just can't. I can't with this game.
Yeah.
I did get this game on PS Vita. Probably like I'm sure it was like 2015 or 2016 or something like that. And I played it for a good while too on my Vita, and I just realized after the main character just starts yelling slash laughing slash crying. I don't know what he was doing. He was just like yelling in the sky. And I'm just that's it. I'm like,
The laugh.
We're done. We're done with this game. I can't do this anymore. It's just a very decent turn-based game, and just don't think about the characters or story or blitzball or anything like that.
Or just anything very, anything you'd want to, associate with good aspects of the game. Again, I don't, begrudge anyone that really likes it. In fact, I can understand, that why like a generation might really be into it. For example, like the generation that maybe grew up with PlayStation 2, and that was maybe the first game that got them into RPGs. So I can totally get it from that aspect, but it's just like, man, that game's tough to go back to. So and I just couldn't do it. But I'm happy that people were able to do it. Besides me, and there's people out there that like it. But anyways, Garrett, we got to get going. But before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can follow me on Twitter at Blank Explosion. You can also find me on the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network. We're live every Thursdays over at twitch.tv/PSVG, and we release on everything, all the podcast services, Apple, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio. I don't know. There's a lot of podcast services out there. So we're there. Check it out. And that's pretty much it.
Very nice, my friend. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, on YouTube at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been level 56 of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye. Bye, Dad.